Welcome to another edition of Answers for the Family. I'm your host, Alan Cardoza, and back with us today is my co-host, Dr. Matt Polacheck. For those of you that are new to the show, Matt is a nationally recognized expert spokesperson on mental health and substance use disorder issues. He utilizes his experience and expertise to lead the Hazelton Betty Ford Center's outpatient services as its director. Matt, glad to have you back.
Good to see you and great to be back.
All right. So, share with us a little bit here before we continue.
Yeah, well, it's good to be back. It's been a while. Obviously, we're in unprecedented times and excited to have our guest today to talk through some of that stuff. Things at the Hazelton Betty Ford Center have been really busy. We've seen a huge switch to virtual, which we'll discuss today. And, you know, I like to remind people always that during this pandemic, we have another equally serious pandemic that our guest is going to talk about. Those numbers will come out a lot later, I think, in the kind of the parallel universe of COVID and addiction. But substance use treatment and substance use addiction isn't going anywhere. And unfortunately, my fear is it's going to increase. So we've got two serious pandemics going, and I'm excited to be here to talk about it and be with both of you.
All right. Well, I want to remind everybody that each week this show will bring on special guests that can inspire, educate, and in some cases entertain, while bringing answers and options to making our lives happier, healthier, and more successful. Now, we're going to introduce you to talented professionals as well as authors who are working to make this world a better place for all of us. Now, I want everybody to know that I would really appreciate it if you could all do me a big favor. Please forward one of our shows to your social media group or to someone you know who can benefit from today's subject. This is one powerful way that we together can make a positive difference in the world. So, Matt, okay. So, with all the negativity and divisiveness out there these days, I hope that you will all find answersforthefamily.com to be a place that you can go to see or hear some of the good that is happening in the world. I want you to know that I am very grateful to all of you that take your precious time to listen to this show. And please remember, this show exists for you. And with that in mind, if there was ever a time in recent years that we needed to focus on gratitude, this is the time. So my son and I wrote the Attitude of Gratitude Journal, something that at the time was geared towards teens going through some changes in their life. Well, we're all going through changes in our lives now. So please, if you get the opportunity, go to our website at answersforthefamily.com, where you can download for free as sort of our gift to you, a copy of this book. It's our gift to you, and all I ask is that you subscribe and give it 21 days and comment on whatever platform you listen to, what focusing on gratitude has meant for you and your family. Now, one of the many quotes that's in the journal, which happens to be one of mine, is, "I've learned that in every unlikable situation, we can choose to respond in one of two ways. We can whine about it, or we can be grateful that we have the intelligence and the ability to turn it around." My guest and co-host today have the intelligence to turn the opioid crisis around. What we need is our policymakers to listen and to take action. So, with that foreshadowing, you can probably guess that our topic today is the opioid crisis. So according to reports, the opioid epidemic has already a national crisis, and the coronavirus has dramatically disrupted ongoing efforts to combat the nation's opioid problem. Walk-in clinics and other vital support programs have been closed, and some community support groups are meeting virtually.
We're seeing a huge uptick in, for instance, the AA community using Zoom and other platforms. And at Hazelton Betty Ford, within a matter of 2 weeks, we transferred over 1,300 patients into the virtual world. And so we're finding new ways to reach people. And the opposite of addiction is community. And so for us, being able to connect with others and bring people together really is the key. As most people are aware, this epidemic is kind of, just continues to spiral out of control. There's more than 2 million Americans that struggle with opioid use disorder, and over 130 Americans every single day in this country die from overdose. Opioids account for a majority of overdose deaths, and leading cause of accidental overdose or accidental deaths in the United States is due to addiction. So it's a crisis that really needs to be a priority for the community, for officials at the federal, state, and local levels, and it's something we really, really need to come together on.
Well, fortunately, joining us, our guest, Harry Nelson, has been called America's #1 healthcare lawyer and a leading expert on our healthcare future. In 2009, he became one of the first lawyers in the country to develop a framework for compliance in cannabis, helping to shape California's law and pushing for expanded clinical research on other plant-based controlled substances, and continues to play a leading role in the expansion of telehealth and machine learning in medicine. Nelson's latest book, United States of Opioids, weaves together a deep dive into the challenges of treating America's pain epidemic, the growing problems of addiction, and the overdose deaths. Nelson, welcome to Answers for the Family.
Thanks so much, Alan. It's great to be with you today.
Well, let's start with just, you've chosen to write the book. A lot of people wouldn't expect an attorney to write the book on opioids. So share a little bit about your choice of writing this book now and why, as an attorney, you put this together.
Sure. Yeah, usually I've been a healthcare regulatory lawyer for about 25 years, and most of the work that people like me do tends to be fairly dry, right? We're giving a lot of advice I give a lot of advice on licensing rules, regulatory requirements. I help write up contracts and transactions, and usually I'm fairly removed from the problems that we deal with. But in this case, I began to get calls in crisis from treatment centers that were having not just a one death in a long stretch, but having overdoses happening on 5 overdoses in a year. And I began to see this issue of patient safety, near misses, overdoses, suicides happening around addiction treatment and in other behavioral health settings, and it became a very personal problem. And at the same time, I was seeing having friends lose children, young adult children to overdose deaths. I saw so many people dying that it became a very personal subject, and I decided that I needed to not just stand on the sidelines as lawyers often do, but to put some ideas out there and hopefully weave together some of the different strands of the crisis that I was seeing from my vantage point in the service of helping to do something about this crisis.
So in your book, The United States of Opioids, you assert that the opioid crisis should be seen more as not as something that is new, but just the latest manifestation of a larger overall drug problem in America. Share a little bit about your thought with that and how different opioids really are when we compare them to other drugs.
Sure. So we hear a lot of the media coverage around the opioid crisis focuses on the terrible behavior by drug companies and the way that people became addicted to opioids first through prescription medications, and then the drug cartels came in. And what I think is kind of missed in that story is that when you actually put together the opioid crisis with the other drug overdose crises that have been killing people and harming people in this country over the last 40 or 50 years, you actually see that they fit together like the pieces of a puzzle. In fact, there was a study out of University of Pittsburgh Medical Center in 2018 that showed that basically over nearly 40 years, we have this curve where year over year, more people die of overdose drug deaths. And what you see is that opioids are just the last 20 years of a bigger problem. And what happens is in different parts of the country, it's very different, right? So in some parts of the country, we saw that the crackdown on prescription drugs led to black tar heroin. In Appalachia and other parts of the country, we saw it led to other types of heroin and other opioids. And basically, we see that there's a market efficiency in drug use, that the people who are selling and trafficking the drugs and the people who are looking for illegal drugs find them, and more people keep dying year over year. So I think that's a critical piece of the puzzle to understand. And then to really ask, if we accept that we're not going to solve the problem strictly by focusing on one drug, what are the deeper issues that are really making for a broader crisis, and so many people, more and more people dying year over year.
You know, it brings a smile to my face hearing you talk, Harry, because in my world, addiction is addiction, and addiction isn't opiate. It isn't, you know, and we've seen, like you're saying, historically, the drug of choice or the substance changes, but addiction still sits there. And for me, you know, hearing you talk, I think you're right. You know, we look at it, you know, the impact of it, and there's certain kind of socioeconomic drugs that go through certain communities, you know, whether it's, you know, crack, and now opiate seems to be more, you know, lower middle class and upper class, kind of hitting a wider disparity of people. But it's not a matter of, like you're saying, the opiate. I feel like addiction is addiction. And so the specific drug is just more of the, you know, the result, not the cause, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important point. I think we miss it so often, and it has very important implications because it means that we can't focus on a drug-specific solution. So, for example, when it comes to opioids, we talk a lot about Narcan and the importance of the overdose reversal drug, and it's a powerful tool that we have, and that we see now not only hospitals but first responders and more people using this overdose reversal drug. But this point should remind us that those are only very short-term solutions, because at some point we're going to move beyond opioids onto the next addiction, and that's not going to be a solution that's going to help us.
Well, and I've got a question then for both of you, which is, if we're stuck in a losing battle where people are just switching from one drug to another, then what's the answer?
I'll tackle it first, Harry. I mean, I kind of cringe when you say losing battle. I mean, I think there's over 20 million people in America in recovery. And we do have, you know, paths towards recovery. But I think what the country needs is hope. I mean, I think we need to see people in the front lines that are doing well in recovery, and that there's paths out there. Maybe, you know, I guess I'm very optimistic, but I'll let you kind of your take on it, Harry.
No, I'm also a hopeful. I'm hopeful. I just think we have work to do. So I think we need to, when we say that we're not going to solve the problem by addressing any one drug, it really means we need to look deeper at what's fueling all of the addiction. So it starts off by identifying root causes. And this is a place, by the way, where I think the pandemic and COVID-19 actually is helping us, because one of the first things we need to do is just be aware of how broad the problems are, right? How broad the conditions that lead people into drug use, be it trauma, be it anxiety and depression, be it chronic stress, post-traumatic stress disorder. We have a whole series of these other comments. And Matt, I'm sorry, Alan, you made a comment at the beginning about 2 pandemics. I actually like to think of all of this as a syndemic. So part of the solution, a syndemic meaning a series of overlapping epidemics. My friend, Dr. Steve Grinstead, uses that term. And I think that's helpful, because what we really have is a series of overlapping problems. So I think the solution starts with becoming aware of that, and then realizing how broad it is, and how, and then to me, it turns to what new skills do we need, what new and what communities can we engage, and where do we find solutions? And I think that we have a very powerful recovery community, but we need to broaden the fight, so to speak. I think we need to look to new arenas of our society. I think we need to really rethink the way that we educate our kids, the way that we parent around these issues, what our faith communities can do. I think we need to look at all of these places and think about what new skills, what new language. And just as one example, what comes out of the COVID pandemic for me, at least one thing, and it ties into something I said in the book, is that there's an enormous amount of shame that keeps people from reaching out for help. And that is often, not for everybody, everybody has a different pathway, but for many people, their story of addiction starts with being too ashamed to ask for help. You know, I talk in the book about one mother whose 12-year-old, 13-year-old daughter, you know, was convinced she was the only kid in her school who was completely worthless. And her shame around her feelings is what led her to start with alcohol and marijuana and on to opioids and to methamphetamine. And so that shame, addressing that shame and getting to a place where we as a society recognize how broad these issues are felt is one example of the many things that we need to do that I think will help us turn the tide.
Yeah, I love that. You know, there's a study that shows that only 10% of people that meet the criteria for a substance use disorder get the treatment, you know, and so I think that ties right into shame, that, you know, there's still this stigma. And it's just an ongoing fight.
Well, and I think, Harry, with what you were talking about, and it kind of goes right into the subtitle of your book, which is a prescription for liberating a nation in pain. And so my question then is, so what is your prescription? So you would have a prescription. So I'd love to hear not only what your prescription is, but Matt, also for you to interject some ideas of what your prescription would be today.
So for my prescription for liberating a nation in pain in the book was really talking and really equipping people with new awareness, new language, new resources, and new support. So it begins with the awareness, begins with just recognizing how broadly felt these issues are. And by the way, just one study that blew me away a couple of weeks ago, Kaiser Family Foundation said that 56% of Americans are reporting at least one mental health symptom as a result of this pandemic. Whether that was, one of the examples was excessive use of alcohol, another was high irritability and bouts of anger and short-temperedness. For other people, it was feelings of hopelessness and anxiety. So a 56% feeling that, and then the numbers go into the mid 60% for everybody who lost their jobs and for people, healthcare workers. And so to me, that it begins with that awareness, and then the language. How do we actually begin to engage with each other in a way that we're not shaming, right? So we have this kind of binary where some of us have a problem and are addicted or mentally ill, and everyone else is fine. And I think when you look at these studies, what we see is that this is really a series of problems on a continuum where some people need tools for self-management and can find informal resources. I talk about this in the book, and when I've been touring about the book, about my own kind of periods in life when I sought professional help, and periods in life when I really relied on informal networks and on tools, even on a daily basis. I'm a user of the Calm app to kind of help process my issues. And I think more formally, I think we need to redirect the fight, right? So we've got these centers like Hazelden Betty Ford that are incredible centers for dealing with high intensity problems, but we need resources dispersed into support a much broader low intensity sort of resources, whether it is coaching, peer mentoring, housing, right? A lot of these issues are not just issues of how do you treat people, but how do you actually address the underlying sources that are causing the problems, helping people coming out of prison and dealing with the problem there, and really thinking of how do we engage and how do we build a generation of children who are equipped with the skills that you need for this world, right? My own kids, I watch them with smartphones, and I feel like I'm putting a weapon in their hands, that is really creating a new level of stress and all this new neurophysiology where they're just getting constantly bursts of messages at them that they have to deal with. And I think we need to educate our kids for a new environment. So I think there's this fight. My prescription is a kind of a broad rethinking of all the places where we can equip people with the tools for this fight.
I love that, and it's great what you're saying, Harry. And I think of a lot of these issues. You use the word continuum, and I think of depression, anxiety, and all these things on a continuum. We all feel depression. We all feel anxious. We all would, people without substance use disorders might have, an increase in their drinking due to the stress of COVID, and they don't meet the criteria of a substance use disorder. So I think that it's great what you're saying, where you hit people where they're at. We understand that you don't have to be suicidal to get treatment for depression, or to have the conversation about depression and get education about, what decreases depressive symptoms. So I love what you're saying, and I think it's great.
Now, and I've got a question. It's probably for both of you, but I think, Harry, if you can start. One of the issues I think has to do with coverage. There's so many things that are dealt with because there is insurance coverage, but yet there are other things that are not covered. And what were some of the changes, or what would be some of the changes if I could give you a magic wand and you could make the changes necessary so that we could have a broader area of coverage so that more people would reach out and get the help that they really need?
So it's a great question. So I think the starting point, I have to say, it's very important to remember that we're only barely a little more than a decade into really radically changing the insurance coverage for this for behavioral health. When I say behavioral health, mental health and addiction, substance use disorder. So it really, the story of coverage started with mental health parity. The Mental Health Parity Act passed it by Congress in 2008. That was the first place where we said we're not going to allow a discrimination on the part of insurance companies between medical surgical conditions and mental health and addiction. The second major step was with the Affordable Care Act, mandating that every plan in the country, it didn't matter if you had a Medicaid plan, your employer-sponsored plan, a commercial insurance plan, every plan needed to cover these conditions. So we're really in the very beginning stages, and what we're seeing is that there is coverage in plans, but it still is. There's a lot of work to do, right? The government doesn't snap its fingers and things change. So, for example, in the middle of this crisis, I've been getting calls from treatment providers who treat people in the TRICARE program, which is for people who are military dependents, and TRICARE only covers professional counseling. It won't cover outpatient programs. It doesn't cover residential stays, which means that they're only meeting part of the problem. So we need for broad. What if I had a magic wand? To take your question, I would like to see not only professional counseling available for talk therapy and that kind of thing, not only outpatient programs for a whole range of conditions, residential stays, and of course when people are more seriously in need of help, inpatient kind of hospital availability, but also I would like to see a broadening into digital therapeutics. I mentioned Calm, but there's a whole series of these digital apps and telehealth, which we started talking about, where we can really make the resources broadly available. And I would like to see the government and insurance companies really thinking and pushing on making resources available so that we can give people more tools. And people will, what my experience, both in work, the clients that I work with and just in my friends and family, is that it's not, none of us are on a static position vis-a-vis the needs that we have in our lives. We go through, we hit crisis moments, we have traumatic events, and we need to create a whole series of resources. Back to that continuum idea.
Mm-hmm. Now, can you pass that wand now to Matt?
Matt, here you go.
I love it. I mean, I'm astonished that we're sitting here in 2020 and you're talking about people that have insurance but can't get treatment for a chronic disease. I'm kind of flabbergasted that. I also think that we want to intervene, like you said earlier, in like the chronic point where we can, start doing more preventative stuff and intervene earlier to where it gets to where you don't need a hospital detoxification, and then to step down to residential programs. I mean, it's just we've got to get there, and Harry, people like you are going to get us there, because we have to have these conversations, and people out there, we've made the point today that people need this, help and treatment, and it's just amazing to me that there's just a lot of opportunity, I'll say, out there.
Yeah, definitely. So, Harry, how has your book been received? Because you are dealing with people in the healthcare industry, you're people dealing with big pharma, and the public at large. These are all people with kind of different approaches right now to this area. How has the book been received to you? And do you see where it looks like it's going to make a difference to get these different groups to start to see things on the level that we're talking about right now?
So, I was very heartened to find a receptive audience for the book. I connected with communities that I had never had a strong connection to all of these networks of parents who, for example, have lost kids to the opioid crisis. Mm-hmm. And I found all of a sudden I was getting pulled into these alliances and seeing a real outpouring of support from the recovery community and everybody who's been touched by this. What I also found was, I found two things I want to say. First, I got invited into some very high level policy conversations, and I had a chance to sit as part of a small group with the head of policy of the DEA, and some other heads of federal agencies. And I realized there's a lot of work to do. So the kind of conversation we're having here today needs to happen. There's a little bit of a disconnect in parts of the federal government where this problem still looks like we're fighting a war on drugs, and we've got work to do to kind of turn some of the federal agencies. And the other thing I found was that there's a lot of people, and I think there's a lot of media interest into talking about the problem of the opioid crisis as about holding the drug makers accountable, which, by the way, I fully support. I just think that what happens is when we turn the opioid crisis and the discussion into look what these drug companies did, then we lose sight of this whole problem we've been talking about, that this problem is not going to be solved by getting a big pile of money from the drug companies. We can use the money, but the problem will still be with us. So I found that there are people who find that who don't want to have that bigger conversation about systemic change, and I found that a lot of people want to talk either about putting the drug dealers behind bars or holding the drug makers to accountable in the litigation.
Well, I find it interesting that you brought up the media, because one of my questions, and again, this can be for both of you, is the media saying, okay, great, we'll support you if we can go after the drug companies and make it a drug problem and focus on that. How about focusing on the media that is affecting the mental health of everybody by their nonstop negative doomsday, if it bleeds, it leads approach to providing news? How much of that is affecting people, and this becomes their outlet by then getting more involved in drugs?
You're asking a big question, Alan. I'll tell you, I'll share with you personally. I went through a very difficult period at the beginning of this crisis. I was convinced my own business was going to fall apart. Thankfully, it has not. And what I noticed was the more that I got in a cycle of watching the news and on TV and reading over and over again, the more it kept me trapped in a negative story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, unfortunately, that's what our media feeds us. That's what's interesting. It's not interesting to talk about problem solving. It's interesting to keep stories of heroes and villains and the sky falling. And so I think for me, the lesson has been I just had to dial it back and really cut my media consumption way down, and my mental health and emotional health got much better as soon as I did. And I just think I don't think we're going to change the way the media operates, but I think we need to sensitize people to the danger of too much absorption in it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. You mentioned, they want to see villains and heroes. I wish then that they would tell the story of the heroes, these mothers who have gone through and gone into recovery and fabricate or kind of fix their life up to be great mothers and community members. And unfortunately, we just aren't telling enough of these stories. I mean, I still feel like when I turn on the news and I get a story about substance use, it's an 18-year-old with a needle in his arm. We're still kind of focusing on the negative. So I'm hopeful that we can start telling better stories and be more positive. I see what you're saying, that to draw eyes, you need kind of excitement or whatever. But you've been in this world now, Harry. You hear these stories of people turning it around, and these stories, to me, these redemption stories are awesome.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Those are the thing that inspired me the most, and I realized the great heroes are, as you're talking about, Matt, are the people who are looking this thing in the eye and coming through it. And I think those are the stories that we need to get out there.
Well, and Harry, I think that your initial answer really is the answer, which is you dialed it back, and I had to dial it back, and many people that I know, that's part of what it is dial it back. But for everybody out there, if you turn it off, if you turn the negative things off, and you choose to find the stations that may be a little more difficult to find, but find the shows that are going to focus on something positive. There are shows out there. You might have to go on the internet, but there's Dare to Be Kind. There are things that you can do that are going to put the mental information in your head that there are heroes out there, that there are people out there that are doing something good, and that the world isn't really the picture that our major media wants to project to everybody. So now let's, well, actually, we need to take a break. I'm getting a little notice here from the engineer. So we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. For everybody out there, you're listening to Answers for the Family. Stay with us, because when we come back, we're going to be talking more about some of the things that can be done to help make positive changes within what is a opioid crisis. So we'll be right back.
Founded over 30 years ago to meet the needs of families in crisis, Westshield has continually focused on resolving issues that negatively impact families and businesses. Our signature therapeutic transportation service helps to ensure that adolescents in crisis are safely transported to specialized schools, programs, and treatment centers with unsurpassed experience and success. We are supported by our full-service licensed investigation agency that has legally, professionally, and compassionately located hundreds of runaways and teens. We are experienced and qualified to help, offering solutions which may include referrals to our international network of top professionals in the fields of educational consulting, psychology, psychiatry, and investigations. Simply put, Westshield Adolescent Services and Westshield Investigations are the best solutions when your family is facing a personal crisis. Call 1-800-899-8585, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's 1-800-899-8585, or visit our website at westshield.com. Thank you.
All right, we're back. We are speaking with Dr. Matt Polacheck from Hazleton Betty Ford as my co-host. Our guest is Harry Nelson, and his book is United States of Opioids. Now, Harry, we've got a couple of listener questions that have come in right before or during the show. And again, I want to start by thanking those that take the time to put together questions and sending them in. We will always do what we can to get them asked. If your question came in and we didn't get it asked on the air, we will ask it off the air and we will post it on everybody's website that you can go to and find it, which includes the answersforthefamily.com site. This one reads, last year, my 16-year-old granddaughter was stopped for speeding with 3 other teens in the car. Intoxicated, she also was found with a bag of pain pills in her purse. My son has had to mortgage his house to get her into rehab so she will not go to jail. But what he is more upset about is that she seems to have no remorse or concern about how serious the situation is. Her attitude is indifferent and acting as if she is the victim. I am sure you have seen many hundreds of situations like this, but my son and his wife have been trying to get her friends, parents together to discuss how to deal with the issues as a group, but they are ignoring the request and painting, give the name of their own daughter, as the villain or the druggie in the whole event. What would you suggest that they do, not only to help their daughter, but to find ways of preventing this from happening to their other 2 children who idolize their older sister? And this is from June in Texas. So Harry, what would you?
I'm happy to say some things, but I feel like in the presence of a clinician like Matt, I should defer. I'm a lawyer, not a clinician. I'm certainly happy to give some reflections, but first I thought if Matt, do you want to share anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. We're talking about 9 or 10 different levels of discussion on this one. I mean, I think that the first thing I would do as a parent in this situation is connect with Al-Anon and resources as far as kind of figuring out really what interventions and really what kind of boundaries need to be set with their daughter. There's a lot of layers to this. Obviously, support is critical for June in this situation, putting herself around people that can help kind of guide this. I'd start with Al-Anon, but I definitely, there's a lot of layers to this. The other aspect of this is we were talking about motivation level of a person. I'm not someone that believes in this kind of rock bottom concept. I don't think people have to hit rock bottom to get the help and treatment they need, or you change their life around. We hear the stories where that's beneficial, but I also think that it's finding a way to connect with a 16-year-old. It's tricky. And so I think that, as a parent, it's your job to have conversations with your kid and can kind of force the conversation if you have to, but it also put people in her life and around her that are valuable and that could have these conversations if you can't have that conversation and figure out, what motivates a 16-year-old girl and trying to figure out and for everyone's different, but figure out what the intervention is specific to her. But this is tricky because you have other kids in the house too, and big parenting decisions.
You know, I'll just add a couple of comments. I think first of all, the question noted that, you know, nearly needing to mortgage their house to pay for treatment. That one of the huge problems here is that a lot of treatment options are only available for people. The options get a lot narrower if you don't have resources to afford very expensive programs. You know, one of the things I talk about, and one of the things I talk about in the book is I have many friends and who sort of, there's like a cycle that you hear people with the resources to provide describe for their children, where people will send their kids to a wilderness program, and then they'll send their kids to a therapeutic boarding school, and they move on, and really, like, change, you know, only happens when people are ready. And Matt really underscored a really important question. You know, I'm 52. My generation grew up with the stories of tough love that we were going to get from our parents. You know, of this idea that you let people, you know, you force them out and let them hit bottom. But the problem with the opioid crisis has been that kids, it's become so easy for kids to die, right? Kids can be living at home and going to a party, coming home with having taken a drug at the party, and die in their sleep, right? So I think that there's not an easy answer here, but I think that I think the effectiveness of the intervention of it's very hard to help kids recognize how serious this is. I don't have an easy answer. I just think that the rules have changed, that you need to be aware of how quickly we can lose our children. Sort of forces a new level of challenge on the situation, and I don't have any easy answers, but I think that the more you connect with, you know, connect your child to the reality and to the community of people who have lived through this, and to recovery community, I think that there's a better chance of hopefully getting that breakthrough and that level of awareness.
I think you hit the, you know, nail on the head there, Harry, with the lethality of opioids. We're really looking at a different monster here in making these decisions as parents. And I don't envy any parent in the situation. You know, you want to know your kid's safe, and you want to make sure you keep them, like you're saying. I mean, even with, you know, the fentanyl now and these printed pills, I mean, it could be one pill one time that ends someone's life. And a 15, 16-year-old isn't thinking about, you know, 35 years old, 40 years old, what their life looks down, you know, looking at what's right in front of them, very narrow vision. Similar to if we're drinking alcohol, our vision gets very narrow. We can only see what's in front of us. So I think that it's not easy being a parent today with a teenage kid who's got a substance use issue. I think that there's no right or wrong answer. I just think it has to be talked through and utilize the resources around you. I'm with you.
Yeah, and I think you both touched on some excellent points, and I would agree. It really comes down to getting help. You know, there's a joke that I have said, you know, to many parents that, you know, when your child turns about 14, a big needle comes out of the sky and sucks out half your brain as a parent, because all of a sudden we become really stupid, and whatever it was that we were really smart about, like when they were little, I've got a video of my son when he was 5 years old, and he's asking me a bunch of questions, and I look to my wife and I go, get the video camera. And so she gets the video camera and puts it on, and he's asking me question after question, and I'm answering him. He goes, wow, Dad, you know everything. And I go, remember that when you're 15, okay? Because maybe about half of that'll be true. So, you know, almost instinctively, they're not going to want to listen to you at that particular age, but there are plenty of people out there that they will listen to, that you don't have that relationship with them to where they don't automatically think that, well, you're a parent, so obviously you don't know anything. So yeah, just get the help, and you're right, there's no easy answer.
You know, it's funny, when I was in private practice, this is a long time ago, working with teenagers, I'd have kids come back and see me after they do therapy for whatever period of time, and 3-4 years later, they come back and visit and kind of update me on what's going on. And I never heard a kid come back and complain that their parent tried to do too much or tried too many interventions. The only thing I ever heard is if the parent wasn't there. you know? And so I think that, you're never going to be false as a parent doing something to show your kid that you care and love and try and get them resources or people around them that are healthy and, or whatever treatment, whatever it is. It's the parents that aren't there that don't participate are the ones that, leave that dent that is harder to fill.
Great point. Great point. And actually, time is going by real quick. So we have another listener question that came in, and this one reads, I had a series of major dental surgeries 2 years ago, was given meds for the pain. I don't think I fully understood why people get hooked on opioids until it actually happened to me. These opioids were so horribly addicting that it took me many months to get off of them. I bought your incredible book and was shocked by the statistics and details on this orchestrated effort by drug companies to make money off of people's pain and suffering. I am a retired teacher, and I want you to know that your book has inspired me to volunteer with the school drug programs in Phoenix. I so miss my students and feel this is a good starting point. You were correct that it does start with each of us caring enough to participate in a grassroots effort. And this is from Wendy in Arizona.
Well, thank you. I'm touched and moved when I hear people that people have that this resonated and moved somebody to action. I'm a believer that that's what this is going to take, is all of us actually caring and getting engaged and not feeling we're at a remove from this problem. So thank you for that.
Okay, let's kind of go back to sort of the the magic wand part of this, and let's talk a little bit about what are some more proactive things that we can do. And one of the things that I wanted to touch on very specifically with you is, we normally, when I'm talking about this, I have people like Matt that are on, and we're talking about everything from a clinical standpoint, what it is that we can do. Well, some of us, and me, my other world is that of investigation, which means I deal with attorneys. And much of the laws that get changed in this country are because attorneys have gone after it. People have, families or whatever, gotten attorneys, they've gone after it and said, if we can't change this through an administrative way, we're going to change this through a court way. What would be some of the ways that we can, for lack of better terms, force the issue and make the changes made that we all know are needed?
Look, I it's a good question. I think that a lot of what I've seen really up close working in policy, working in advocacy, is that government legislators and governors and at the federal level, congressmen, senators, they are affected by who speaks up. And so the drug companies and the insurance companies have their highly paid representatives, using their voice. But when parents are heard, right? So the question is, when should you show up? And the answer is every legislative session, right? There's a whole new season, and there are new laws that are being talked about, being put out there by one side or the other. And what we need to do is have much more of a network of coming together in support of speaking with one voice. One group that I really want to pay tribute to, that I think has been an incredible source of support, and it's not the only one, is Shatterproof. They have risen in the last few years. Gary Mandel was a father who lost a son to a heroin overdose and poured his significant resources into creating this national network, tying together lobbyists and professional advocates with a whole network of families, parents, people touched by this crisis to speak loudly. And I think we need to carry the message into every state and into the federal government to create more access to care and to have a perspective heard from families affected by the problem, and not just by insurance companies and drug companies.
Matt, any last thoughts?
Yeah, it's ironic that Harry said that, because at Hazelton, we just partnered with this podcast for the people that uses Shatterproof's Just 5 web program to promote awareness and reduce stigma and share information, about addiction prevention and treatment. So it's funny that literally today we talked with Shatterproof in the program. So that's awesome.
All right.
Yeah, Sorry.
Go ahead.
And anyway, sorry about that.
No. Anyway, I really want to thank both of you. The time has flown by, but please keep the conversation going. I think that from different levels, both of you are making such a huge inroads into the things that we need. And as I think I said in the initial introduction, which is we just need the policymakers to listen and take action, because we have people out there that that want to help, that want to take us in the right direction. So keep up the great work, guys.
Alan, thank you so much. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to come on, and Matt, really great to share ideas today.
All right, and for everybody out there, the book is United States of Opioids. I highly recommend it, and you don't have to have a family member that is going through this problem to read the book, because it really talks about what we're going through as a nation, and focuses on some, it's a mental health issue, not just an opioid issue. So again, both of you, thank you. Now, next week, folks, James Redfield, author of the New York Times bestseller, The Celestine Prophecy, says something beautiful is happening in an effort to help a world gripped by hate, fear, and corruption on all sides. A growing wave of consciousness is sweeping the planet as multi-generations are again reading and passing to others the new edition of The Celestine Prophecy. And for anybody out there, I've read The Celestine Prophecy. I've always also read the 12th Prophecy, which, and James has been on the show before. It really is a beautiful book. It's well written, and it really opens a lot of people's eyes to what's going on in our world. Now, what he's doing is this is a show that you really won't want to miss, because he is going to put us in a situation to be able to follow his tour. So he has an upcoming tour that is called his Inspiration Tour, which he will conduct workshops and various talks across America. So please put us on your calendar, or visit our archives of past shows at answersforthefamily.com, or you can subscribe to our show through iTunes, iHeart, Stitcher, YouTube, Spreaker, SoundCloud, or whoever you listen to our show. Please be good human beings and be with us next week on Answers for the Family.
You're listening to Answers for the Family with Alan Cardoza, right here on LA Talk Radio.